I think that it is value added for people who have played the game, because I've played the game and I was always sort of on alert for that. You know, if there's something comes in that's wildly different and new, would it feel to me as somebody who played the game like I'm getting to see awesome new stuff as opposed to just different or pointlessly different?
Let's talk about The Last of Us on HBO. Before we get into it, I just want to say that I was rooting for the TV adaptation of The Last of Us to be fantastic. I wanted it to be good. Hell, even though I'm extremely skeptical of that outcome, I still want it to be good when Season 3 rolls around. It's for this reason that, although I've wanted to make this video for a long time, I've put it off for just as long. I get asked about my opinion on the show all the time when I'm streaming, and I can often talk about this at length, but it's also kind of exhausting. This isn't because I get asked about it a lot, more so because of how expansive the topic is, how loaded the conversation around it often is, and because, at the end of the day, I prefer to talk at length about things I enjoy. If I had fun with something, I'll likely have fun talking about it. And if I didn't, then the discussion can feel more like a chore or an obligation. Let's start with that, because as much as so much of online culture and discourse is founded upon negativity, I'm not built for that. And to be frank, I'm not convinced that you can build your brand upon being relentlessly negative without it having an adverse effect upon who you are as a person. Especially if it's tied up with the internet's other most popular emotion, rage. This only gets worse when you consider the easiest shortcut to that negativity and rage: anti-woke and culture war grifting. First and foremost, I've got a strong personal, principled, and political objection to this. I don't hate women, or gay or trans people, or people of colour, and they would rightly view me very differently if I built a platform off arguing that their very presence in media is a threat to its quality or my ability to enjoy it. And if I was to do so, I wouldn't just be broadcasting a weird personal bigotry to the world. I would be cultivating an audience of people with the exact same prejudices. I would be telling them not only that it's okay to have those prejudices, but also to voice them openly. I would be enabling political movements that want to enable that prejudice, to radicalize those who hold it, and to weaponize it. Even if we were to disregard the openly stated political intent and easily verifiable real-world consequences of all this, which is a very weird, mealy-mouthed thing to do to begin with, there's also the fact that the anti-woke culture war discourse also makes it so much harder to honestly critique media. Genuine criticism too easily gets lost under the weight of the endless bile about whether something is woke or not, and the hostile vitriol, understandably, also makes those who enjoy the thing condemned as woke more defensive and hostile in turn. As an aside, in saying this, I'm not trying to draw an equivocation between the two sides. I'll leave that to the Weasley no politics centrists who, let's face it, are actually on the culture war side, but struggling with the cognitive dissonance of the fact that the side they actually support is batshit insane. Just like all centrists. It's perfectly understandable, actually, to get a bit defensive if liking a thing in public gets you piled on by terminally online weirdos, many of them actively misogynistic, homophobic, racist, and ableist. Like any reaction, people can be over the top about it. And as I say, it makes it that much harder to voice honest critiques of something that has flaws worth critiquing, but is also a target of the culture war. But I do get it. It's the reason why, when talking to someone who dislikes something that I also dislike, the fucked up discourse cycle we're all caught up in means I have to ask, why? Do they dislike it because of some honest, legitimate critique? Which can include critiques I disagree with, by the way. Or do they dislike it because they're a bigot and/or lunatic? The point of all this is to say that in this video, I want to talk at length about my problems with The Last of Us Season 2 and how it's retroactively made Season 1 worse on reflection as well. But if you've clicked on this video because you want me to be relentlessly negative and rage about it, or worse, if you want me to declare it woke and use that as a thinly veiled excuse to rail against diversity, women, and the gays, possibly while bullying a young actor over their looks in disgustingly ableist terms, then you're not going to get that here, and you need to go somewhere else. Probably therapy, honestly. With all of that out the way, and no doubt a bunch of unhinged comments steaming straight towards my held comment section, let's get into it. One of the biggest and most recurring critiques that I have of the show, especially as we get into Season 2, is that it isn't like the game. A common objection to that, when discussing adaptations in general, is to question why that matters at all. Change is necessary in adaptation, because you're not just recreating the work one for one, but translating it from a different medium which has a different way of communicating the same ideas to its audience and different strengths and weaknesses in how it tells stories. This is true, and I agree with it. But changes on this front, The Last of Us has often done really well. The source material is a video game, which needs to do specific things for immersion, as you're not just watching the protagonist, but controlling him. The game needs to tell the story without taking agency away from the player, or presenting you with information that you, as the main character, couldn't possibly know. But the show can do these things, and the cold opens in Season 1 are a great way of doing that, since they don't have to worry about an audience that's impatient to get back to gameplay. While showing us events from different points of view doesn't threaten immersion, because whilst we're following Joel's story, we are not embodying Joel. All of that is not only fine, but effective in conveying more information about the world and the narrative that in the game we would get only if we listened to NPC conversations or picked up artifacts to read. But this isn't the kind of change that needs defending, and instead, adaptational differences are invoked for changes that, rather than enriching the existing narrative, instead alter it. Again, a case can be made for that. Episode 3 of Season 1 is a case in point. It's a shame that we don't get to see Bill and Ellie interacting, but most of that section in the game is a side quest to justify more combat, culminating in a boss fight. Showing us more of Bill's backstory serves to flesh out not only the character, but also the world, while still providing a thematic link back to Joel's journey and story. The thematic link is different. Bill in the game is a cautionary example for Joel, a demonstration of what he could become if he rejects love, family, and community. That Bill survives, but he isn't really living, and Joel's arc requires him to reject becoming Bill, as much as it requires him to reject becoming Henry later on, which we'll come back to when discussing Season 2's changes. But in the show, Bill instead offers an example for Joel to embrace, accepting that love while being strong enough to do whatever is necessary to protect them, heavily foreshadowing Joel's actions in the hospital. So although they could have done the original Bill storyline, if we ignore the fact that the show's budget for infected combat basically went entirely to episode 5, the change here is still in service of reinforcing the same story arc as the game, rather than pushing it in a different direction. A lot of people take this further and insist that adaptations have to make changes not just due to the change in medium, or to strengthen the same themes in a different way, but so that they're not just telling the same story again. The source material already exists. Why do you need it rehashed? I fundamentally disagree with this for a number of reasons. Firstly, Seeing the same story in a different medium is cool. It's fun to see a book brought to life in a movie or a game played out on a TV show, if it's done justice. I will, and absolutely have, consumed the same story multiple times by rereading books, rewatching TV shows and movies, and replaying games. So I have no issues whatsoever watching a TV show that's faithful to the game it's adapting. Second, different mediums have different audiences. The point of an adaptation is to bring this story to a new audience, and in doing so, the aim should be to give that new audience the experience in consuming that story in that medium that the original audience had with the original medium. That might necessitate changes sometimes, but not just change for its own sake. Can telling a completely different story work, even be better than the source material? Sure. And the obvious ones to point to are the likes of The Shining, where the book and film are fundamentally different and both praised by critics and fans alike. But it can also result in utter abominations. And as much as I find it fun, there's no denying that the 1993 Super Mario Bros. Movie is just really, really bad. And that began with Nintendo taking no interest whatsoever in creative control over the property. Related to the second reason, the third is that often if you really like a creative work, you tend to want to share it with other people. This can be the basis of new friendships forming, but also strengthen existing ones if you can build upon these shared experiences. My dad has very similar tastes to me in stories, and we enjoy an awful lot of the same TV shows, movies, and books. Though he doesn't read as much as me, and he doesn't play video games at all. Being over 70, he's not likely to start now. But that doesn't mean he wouldn't enjoy The Last of Us for the same reasons that I did. And so a TV adaptation is a great way for me to share an interest that I wouldn't otherwise be able to. That is if it's good, anyway. Season 1 serves pretty well as a way to share The Last of Us Part 1 with him. But Season 2 absolutely does not represent everything that I enjoyed and fell in love with from The Last of Us Part 2. Frankly, it's hard to see how anyone who loves the game can share the TV show with a non-gamer friend and get them to understand why we feel so strongly about it. The Last of Us Part 2 opens with Joel methodically cleaning a guitar as he confesses his actions at the end of the first game. This confession to his brother Tommy while they're out on patrol doesn't just recap the climax of the prior entry in the story. It establishes the guitar as a recurring motif, which after his death will come to symbolise the connection that Ellie still holds to him. It subtly establishes the repaired relationship between the Miller brothers, and how while Tommy did not approve of Joel's past actions to keep them both alive, he is here willing not only to side with Joel, but also to take the secret to his grave. And in doing so, it underlines Joel's worst crime in regard to Ellie. Not what he did to save her, but the lie told in the aftermath. The song Future Days by Pearl Jam and the gifting of the guitar closes out this scene beautifully, both completing the guitar motif and serving as a passing of the baton. Joel's story is done, and what follows is Ellie's. In The Last of Us Season 2, the confession to Tommy never happens, and it's replaced by a far more vague admission to brand new character Gale, while the Future Days rendition doesn't happen until episode 6, a single late season episode containing all of the flashbacks that in the game are delivered separately, at moments where they help us better relate to Ellie's state of mind in the present day. The first time Ellie picks up a guitar in Seattle and plays the opening notes to the song, it's before TV viewers have any understanding of its significance. And it never happens again. In the game, before Ellie serenades Dina with Take On Me, Dina wanders in as Ellie is playing the opening notes to Future Days, almost intruding on a private moment. The subsequent change of song is a sweet moment between the two of them, which adds more weight and backstory to their relationship. while the prior intrusion is one of multiple scenes in the game which emphasize how much thoughts of Joel consume Ellie. Thoughts which go from mournful and reflective to vengeful and obsessive as we come into contact with the Salt Lake crew and learn more about who Ellie is pursuing. We do not see these moments in the show, and instead, Dina walks in on Ellie playing Take On Me, which performs a different role here because the two are not in a relationship and will not be until the end of the episode. Returning to the opening of the season, instead of Joel's confession, we see Ellie and Joel walk off in the moments after the ending of season 1. We then cut to Abby and her friends, 5 of them instead of the 8 we get in the game, who we immediately learn are survivors of Joel's massacre in the Firefly Hospital and intend to hunt and kill him in retribution. We then see them at the end of the first episode when they've reached Jackson, setting up a threat and a cliffhanger ahead of episode 2. In the game, Abby and Owen are introduced only once they've reached Jackson. Their conversation reveals that they're looking for someone, though we don't know who, and we see that she is obsessive in her pursuit when she recklessly pushes on alone after it seems as though Owen is having a change of heart. By pure luck, she's saved by Joel and Tommy, and when Tommy reveals their names, recognition in her eyes is a subtle signal that there is danger ahead. But the audience is still as caught off guard as Joel and Tommy are when the actual attack happens.
Y'all act like you heard of us or something.
Because they have.
In the show, the scene is different for a number of reasons. There's an infected invasion happening in Jackson, which creates an urgency for Joel to leave that isn't there in the game, where the mansion is a refuge from the storm after they've finished off the infected. So, instead of being caught completely off guard by a shotgun blast to the knee, Joel is distracted enough for Abby's crew to hold Dina hostage in order to make him cooperate. And after she is put to sleep, there's more exposition to establish her motives before the shotgun is used.
I saved your life.
What life?
Dina is there in place of Tommy because he is back in Jackson leading the battle against the infected. The game scene of Ellie and Dina going on patrol is replaced with 2 separate patrols. The first with the pair amongst a group led by Ellie's ex Kat, where they defy orders in order to go into the supermarket. While this does some work in establishing the chemistry between the pair, although at this point it doesn't feel romantic as it did in the game, it's primarily about establishing a new type of infected in the form of stalkers. And Ellie being bitten allows us to see that she is hiding her immunity. The second half of the game's patrol chapter is shown as a separate patrol the day after, with Ellie instead partnering with Jesse. The pair still take shelter from the storm and find a stash of weed cultivated by deceased community member Eugene, but here it provides a backdrop for a conversation with Jesse to tell us some plot details that we will see in flashback later anyway. And of course, it excludes the defining moment of Ellie and Dina's relationship. For what it's worth, I think that the change from the Horde battle in the gondola station to the battle on Jackson's walls can be defended, as allowing the show to heighten the stakes in a way that the game couldn't without effectively removing agency from the players and cutting gameplay. I would even say that showing the winter dance scene in episode 1, rather than saving it for a flashback when Ellie leaves the farm, does a solid job of establishing the conflict between Ellie and Joel in a way which sets up why she is distraught and intent on revenge as she is. There are also potential arguments for other specific changes to the game, and even whilst I don't agree with the changes or their justification, as we will get to, they at least don't fall into the category of pointlessly different that Craig Mazin claimed back in season 1 that he wanted to avoid. However, there are still plenty of changes for which the necessity isn't apparent at all, and which really do come off as change for its own sake. Knowing that Jackson is run by an elected council, it doesn't follow that we need to see them veto sending a posse after Abby. Nor is it necessary to have Ellie and Dina wait 3 months before setting off. The immediate priority of rebuilding Jackson after the battle, and therefore delaying a decision, is enough reason for them to sneak away much sooner. And no part of that whole sequence is more pointless than Ellie's reconciliation with Seth. A completely unnecessary subplot in its own right, and doubly so because the payoff of Ellie taking his rifle bears no fruit whatsoever. The rifle having to be scrubbed from the artwork because it's never used underlines this point, and highlights in a similar vein how the early scene of Ellie learning fighting techniques to take on bigger opponents is also a setup that goes absolutely nowhere. But not only are so many of these changes functionally pointless, they actually have a snowball effect that undercuts the intent of the source material. The most obvious of these is Ellie and Dina's relationship. True to the game, upon reaching Seattle, Dina reveals that she's pregnant with Jesse's child. However, this revelation, tied with the choice to delay the pair leaving Jackson, means that Dina has to be with Jesse after the Battle of Jackson. This, in turn, means that Ellie and Dina cannot get together beforehand, as Dina cheating on Ellie with Jesse would have been an irreparable betrayal that utterly undercuts the story. Placing Dina with Joel instead of Ellie avoids this, while at the same time giving Dina a strong motive to support Ellie's quest, even though they aren't a couple. However, this takes Tommy away from the violence that killed his brother, and removes his shared experience of that incident with Ellie. At the same time, Ellie decides to make her case to the council, to take a group with her after Abby. This in turn removes the stakes from her argument with Tommy, wherein he realizes that she cannot be talked out of going, and so preempts that by going himself and urging Maria to lock down Jackson so that Ellie cannot follow. Tommy does end up in Seattle, but only in the wake of Ellie's trail, rather than the reverse. Coupled with the removal of Nick from the Salt Lake crew, this takes away the scene where we see exactly what Tommy is capable of at the Saravina Hotel, which of course plays into the journey that he goes on, culminating in losing his sight in one eye and walking with a severe limp. In the game, being forced to revisit the violence of a past he had forgone on Ellie's behalf, and losing everything as a consequence, makes him extremely bitter. So that by the end, he goes from trying to protect Ellie from the path of violence to pushing her along it in the hopes it will give him a closure that he cannot seek for himself. Going back to Ellie and Dina, their relationship only beginning while they're in Seattle also means that it's a lot harder to put them in the conflict they have at the end of day one and still have it be believable that they remain together. So instead, after Dina comes to terms with Ellie's immunity, Ellie is supportive of the pregnancy in a way that only makes sense for a version of Ellie that has not been on this journey. It results in a tonal dissonance that completely undermines what is supposed to be a steady descent into violent obsession, where Ellie is at risk of completely losing herself. The flashbacks in episode 6 also have a snowball effect, though this time not on the order of events in the present, so much as in recontextualizing Joel and Ellie's relationship in a way that is detrimental to the cohesion of the story. Craig Mazin came up with the idea of having not just the birthday gift flashback, but all flashbacks take place on one of Ellie's birthdays. First, the future days scene on her 15th birthday, then the birthday gift when she turns 16, then her moving into the garage at 17 after a fight with Joel over her relationship with Kat, and finally her 19th birthday, where Joel takes her on her first patrol and they discover Eugene has been bitten. Joel lying to her is what makes Ellie realize that Joel lied about the Fireflies and completely breaks down their relationship. In the game, the Finding Strings flashback takes place when Ellie is 17. At this point, she is already taking part in group patrols and is being recommended for paired patrols. Joel states that he thinks Ellie is too young for them, but that he trusts her. This is because that trust has already been earned in the first game. And as I mentioned earlier, Henry and Sam's story serves as a cautionary tale for Joel on the risks of being too overprotective and not trusting Ellie. But in the show, their relationship regresses because Joel holds it back from patrols by at least 2 full years. This also serves to recontextualize Ellie's actions in the show. Most obviously, the porch scene between Ellie and Joel that we see in flashback at the end of the game occurs 2 years after Ellie had her suspicions confirmed that Joel had lied to her. He told her the truth about Salt Lake City, and she reacted by saying that they were done. This complete breakdown of their relationship explains her vitriol and his heartbreak after the altercation with Seth. And therefore, Ellie saying that she would like to try to forgive him is a huge development with massive emotional weight, especially given where it appears in the game. In the show, Ellie doesn't learn the truth of Salt Lake City in the same way. Instead, she infers it from Joel's lie regarding Eugene. A lie which, while hurtful to Ellie, was very obviously meant as comfort for Gale, and which caused far more pain and distress as a result of Ellie revealing it. Not only is this more recent, but it also arguably makes Ellie's outburst after the Seth incident far less sympathetic, since we missed the portrayal of the hurt that Joel causes Ellie, instead only seeing Ellie cause hurt to an already grieving widow. The subsequent reconciliation on the porch is also the first time Ellie has the actual truth confirmed by Joel, and she goes almost immediately from learning what happened, including, unlike in the game, learning that Joel killed Marlene, to being ready to consider forgiving him. The truncated timeline and altered order of events only serves to lessen the emotional weight of it all and makes Ellie's position far less sympathetic. Beyond this, there is what the changes say about Ellie's abilities. In the game, she is also hot-headed and prone to recklessness, but she absolutely can take care of herself. And she's being recommended for paired patrols so young because of her effectiveness in the group patrols. In the show, her first patrol is mere months before the plot actually kicks off, and when we see her in combat, she is notoriously bad at it. She bests a stalker only by getting it after it bites her. The kills we see of a clicker and a WLF member at the TV station resemble 14-year-old Ellie from Part 1 rather than 19-year-old Ellie from Part 2, and she has to be saved from the stalkers in Seattle by Jesse. And she manages to kill Owen and Mel by accident. We'll come to both of those incidents in due course. Even outside of combat, Ellie doesn't achieve anything in the show under her own steam. Dina provides the tools for her to get to Seattle, strongly implying that otherwise she might have simply gotten lost in the wilderness. Dina also plots out WLF positions once they reach the theatre. This also happens in the game, but there it's a moment of reconciliation with Dina, still enabling Ellie in a bid to show that she is not a burden. Where here, alongside the tonal whiplash in Ellie's mood that we've already discussed, it instead looks like Dina is better than Ellie at staying focused on Ellie's revenge quest. Then, once they set off, together, rather than Ellie alone as in the game, they meet Jesse not because he and Ellie are being pursued in tandem by the WLF, but because he needs to save them from the infected. This then leads them into a forest controlled by the Seraphites, and it's only because she gets split up from Jesse and Dina that Ellie stumbles upon the hospital and Nora, where she transforms into a single-minded pursuer essentially only for the length of that sequence. Craig Mazin has been open that he doesn't view Ellie as competent, when using that word to describe Abby in contrast to Ellie. And this speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding not only of Ellie, but also of the fact that reckless and incompetent are not synonyms. In the game, Ellie kills 4 members of the Salt Lake crew. She kills Owen and Mel because their attempted interrogation goes wrong, but the actual killing is done under her own steam and agency, as are Jordan and Nora's deaths. After the fact, we see how these acts affect her, but before and during, any hint of fear or uncertainty is buried by her rage. In the show, Jordan doesn't exist. Nora's death is the only one that reflects the source material, though the aftermath doesn't, for reasons that we'll get to in a moment. With Owen and Mel, the shot she fires is purely reflexive, her eyes wide with fear in the moment and afterwards. Where Game Ellie fights back and still tries to extract an answer from the dying Owen, Show Ellie is trapped by shock and then overcome with panic at the realization that Mel is pregnant, futilely trying to save her. It's an effectively horrifying moment, but instead of being one where we see the damage wrought by a young woman led onwards by grief, rage and trauma, losing herself to the act she's committed, we see a frightened child caught up in a situation entirely out of her control. Before we get into that though, let's go back to Nora, because while most of this scene is basically in tune with the events of the game, and therefore largely out of character for the version of Ellie on the show, there is one key difference. When Ellie interrogates Nora, she learns why Abby killed Joel. Say, did you know that Joel shot Abby's father in the head? We are told this explicitly more than once throughout season 2.
An unarmed doctor you shot in the head. That was my dad.
He killed everyone in that hospital, including the only fucking person alive that can make a cure from you. That was Abby's father. And Joel shot him in the head. That's what he did. And he killed everyone in the hospital. He killed Abby's father, who was a doctor, and Joel shot him in the head.
These lines are a subtle hint at the fact that Joel shot Abby's dad in the head. And they're also an Easter egg for those who paid careful attention to the finale of season 1, where if you watch closely, you can in fact see that Joel shot Abby's dad in the head.
Wait, what? Joel shot Abby's dad in the head?
So much has already been said about the basic storytelling rule of show, don't tell, and how The Last of Us inverts that to deliver large amounts of exposition that basically free us of any obligation to read between the lines, interpret for ourselves, or even just keep up with the basic plot points. But I don't want to dwell on that too much. But I do want to talk about how this need to spell everything out doesn't just remove any obligation for the audience to actually follow events. It actively changes the narrative in ways that are unflattering to the characters' arcs, and also potentially sets up future events to make less sense than they otherwise might have. Ellie from the game knows what Joel did, and learns from Nora that this is why Abby murdered him. But she doesn't learn that the surgeon was Abby's father. At the confrontation in the theatre, Ellie still believes it to be because the cure has been lost, and she says as much to Abby before they fight. Show Ellie, however, knows that Abby's anger is born of her father's death, and this changes not only the dialogue, she no longer says, "There's no cure because of me," but also the manner in which it's delivered. At the start of the episode, Ellie tells Dina in full why Abby killed Joel, and does so in a way that suggests she is sympathetic towards her motives. Dina starts off by trying to argue that Nora got what she deserves, something that she doesn't do in the games, and which again suggests that the show seems to have forgotten that Ellie should need reining in from her quest rather than having to be pushed to continue it. But Dina ends by appearing shocked and appalled by what Joel did. This sympathy for the enemy only deepens after the new version of Owen and Mel's deaths, and Ellie even tearfully offers up to Abby that she didn't mean to kill her friends. Not only is this tonally at odds with the begrudging tone from the scene prior, where Tommy asks if she can make her peace with Abby getting to live, and she says she'll have to, but it also raises questions about how the final act of this arc will look. Game Ellie is not constantly conflicted over her quest for revenge, but rather suffering from the trauma of what happened to Joel, compounded by the trauma of her own actions. Her moments of clarity through remorse are strong, but rare, in the wake of Nora and Mel, but she retains her anger. She cannot settle or find peace at the farm, and both the PTSD and Tommy's intervention serve as the catalyst to drive her to Santa Barbara, the final wedge between her and Dina. How the show can do this even half as convincingly, given that Ellie has been tearful or joyful far more than she's been vengeful, remains to be seen. But the excessive exposition has harmed her story arc just as much as the tonal whiplash of her emotions. And the fact that most of the show's version of this journey happened to her without most of the intentionality that we see in the game. As an aside, the weirdest misadventure imposed upon Ellie by the show is her brief sojourn to the Seraphites Island. Yes, this was part of an early draft of the game story, and cut for pacing reasons, but it's stretching credulity to suggest that the game version would have even vaguely resembled this. Ellie being washed ashore, immediately captured and nearly strung up, and then saved by the WLF invasion of the island, and it apparently being easier to abandon her than finish the lynching. One stated reason for this happening was to show how obsessed Ellie was, beyond all reason. Except that the show cut plenty from the game that could have shown this more organically. And Ellie being washed overboard and swimming to the aquarium, as in the game, already served to make this point without an utterly nonsensical sidebar. The other justification for this scene is far more sinister.
We just get to see how chilling it is to be surrounded by everybody that's trying to exact violence, including children that have been taught to hate people outside of their group.
These were the very people that she was trying to defend earlier when the very same thing was happening to one of their kids. And this is the problem with people who have lost any sense of similarity of sin. What we do is justified. What you do is evil.
This coming on the heels of an earlier scene where the WLF capture a child and Ellie wants to intervene but is held back by Jesse, appears effectively to serve as justification for treating children as combatants in war. At the least, by being so, ironically, black and white about the idea that both sides are as bad as each other, it suggests that there are no innocents in this conflict. Not only does this go against one of the key themes of Abby's half of the story with Lev and Yara, but, especially given the real-world inspirations for the WLF Seraphite conflict, this framing is really objectionable. Free Palestine. Okay, so I didn't just want to leave that there as a punchline. There's a very real problem with taking a complex conflict with deep roots and assuming that any level of complexity means that both or all sides are equally at fault. Aside from being lazy as an analytical framework, there's also the seeming paradox that this false equivalence serves as apologia for the actions of one side and condemnation of the other. Perhaps more effectively than explicitly taking sides could. Because the unearned credibility that the world gives this kind of centrism provides cover for the same propaganda functions that are far more obvious from open partisans. Obviously this group are bad, but their bad is so obvious as to hardly need stating. It can be virtually ignored most of the time. What really needs attention is how that side are just as bad as what they claim to oppose. And by just as, of course, we really mean more. Because we're at this point implying that even the active opposition to what we know is bad, in basically any form, creates an equivalence that in practice makes the opposition the bad guy. Sure, that other kid was bullying you, but did you have to punch them in front of everyone? Let's give you a dressing down while coddling them because they're crying now. Then go back to ignoring it when they resume their bullying. Centrism is basically the mother of the bully, horrified that their baby got hit back. That's true whether they're sabotaging their own party's electoral chances because their leader wants to help ordinary people in a way that big business doesn't really like, whether they're appalled that trans people won't be civil to super rich transphobes lobbying to exclude them from public life, or whether they're outraged that opposition to an ongoing genocide doesn't consider the feelings of those who identify with the genocide. It's as true in the game as in the show, that a military conflict where one side is the clear instigator and oppressor is a poor parallel for an interpersonal conflict that ultimately only ends if the individuals involved choose not to perpetuate the cycle of violence. Ellie and Abby can stay their own hands and walk away. And even though Ellie almost didn't, the hope that the other side will follow suit isn't an unreasonable one, given that the sides and the stakes are personal and individual. How can the Seraphites walk away when the WLF have already decided that a truce won't have staying power, and the only reasonable solution is genocide? There's much more that could be said here, but as that is fundamentally a critique of the source material rather than the adaptation, I'll save that for another video. The stark differences in the characterization of Ellie between The Last of Us Part 2 and The Last of Us Season 2 are a good place to start when interrogating why Season 1 didn't feel as disconnected from the source material. Because in fact, the flaws in the adaptation were there in the first season as well. They just became more obvious in retrospect with Season 2 to examine. Neil Druckmann was far less involved in Season 2 than Season 1 due to other commitments. This was similar for Part 2 compared to Part 1, because although he was creative director from both games, he brought on Hallie Gross as co-writer for the second game since he had become co-president of Naughty Dog. In the game's case, this was a positive because of the strength that Hallie brought to a game with dual female protagonists, as well as adding in elements such as romance that Neil was admittedly far less comfortable with. On the show, however, what this meant was that Craig would become the sole writer of all but the last 2 episodes. And while Neil and Hallie would co-write these 2 episodes, marking an immediate and visible improvement in the writing, they were still having to do so in collaboration with Craig and building on the previous 5 episodes that he had written alone. It's hard not to see this, and the subsequent announcement that neither Neil nor Hallie would be involved in Season 3, officially due to workload at Naughty Dog, and wonder if they too thought that it was impossible to realign the show with the source material, given the direction in which Craig had taken things. This is pure speculation, of course, but Neil in particular is a collaborative writer by nature. He's on record about how women at Naughty Dog helped steer him away from story ideas that were misogynistic, about how Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson helped shape the writing of the characters that they were portraying, and about how Hallie helped transform Part 2 from his original outline to the final product we got. This being the case, it's hard to see why he wouldn't find some way to still be involved, even if at arm's length. But it also explains why he might have said yes to Craig's ideas for changes far more than he ought to have. Whatever the truth of the matter behind the scenes, the fact is that between the game and the TV show, Ellie Williams is a fundamentally different character. Even if you're correct for the tonal whiplash that I mentioned earlier. Though it almost seems that said whiplash is actually part of her core characterization, since the 2 major defining differences also completely contradict one another. Since Season 1, particularly the scenes in Episode 1 where Joel kills a Fedra soldier in front of her, and in Episode 3 where she coldly slices at a stuck infected, Craig has made a point of showing us that Ellie is activated by violence. He saw Joel's actions as bringing out something in her, which we see more of in the scene with the infected. And this is expanded upon in Season 2, where Catherine O'Hara's character dismisses the notion of Joel being a bad influence upon her in this regard, and instead suggests that Ellie is a collaborator with Joel in this sense, actively choosing violence and wanting to be influenced in this direction. In the first game, there is no equivalent to this activation. Instead, when they are taken by Fedra, Ellie acts rashly by attacking one soldier with a knife and is immediately horrified by Joel and Tessa's murder of the soldiers, naively stating that she thought they would just hold the soldiers up. Through the rest of the game, we then see violence foisted upon Ellie, from her shocked and often horrified reactions when Joel's kills are particularly violent, to having to fight David's men and eventually David himself. There's a weight to the violence that she has both seen and committed at so young an age, which exacerbates the trauma she has suffered, starting with what happened to Riley and growing as she survives while seeing others that she comes to care for die. Rather than being activated by violence, Ellie is a character defined and driven by survivor's guilt, which is perfectly summed up in her line that it can't be for nothing. Nonetheless, there's potentially an argument to be made for how the Ellie that is activated by violence can be equally compelling, particularly in the second story, which is entirely about that violence and its repercussions. This character trait could serve to pull her further into the spiraling darkness that consumes Ellie throughout her journey in Seattle as her body count grows, and the impact of that warps her perspective, as well as fueling her rage and trauma. Except that we never see this, because the Ellie that travels through Seattle in the show is almost immediately remorseful for every kill she makes, and there are just 4 of them in total. Not only does this make a mockery of the setup done by the show itself, from Ellie learning to take on bigger opponents to her receiving Seth's rifle, which she never fires once, but it also speaks to a fear of committing to the journey Ellie goes on in the game. A resistance to having Ellie's actions be too dark, or to her losing her perceived innocence. Even though loss of innocence and loss of self is core to her character arc in this story. There's a general infantilization of Ellie in Season 2, not only here, but also in how her relationship with Dina is portrayed. A lot of people rightly reacted with, at the least, ick, to Craig's description in episode 5 of the podcast of Ellie and Dina's relationship as a shifting parent-child relationship.
Because now it's a different parent-child thing, right? Dina's been the parent. Now Ellie's the parent. And when parents need their kids to do something very quickly, they will lie to them. Now, obviously, it's true. Ellie can get bit a lot and Dina can't. But really what Ellie knows is she's going to get ripped apart. She just needs Dina to somehow survive in that cage and not get ripped apart.
Being unjustly charitable, this could just be a poor choice of metaphor when describing the fact that Ellie is lying to Dina to protect her, picking on a theme that's more appropriate to Joel's lie to protect Ellie. But if we go back to the behind the scenes video that accompanied episode 3, we get more context behind what Craig means when he says in episode 5 that now Ellie is the parent. Because he means that before, it was Dina in this role.
We get the sense right away that Ellie's force of spirit will be what drives everything forward, but it is Dina's thoughtfulness and intelligence and prudence that will keep them both alive.
This isn't a reflection of the game, where both characters are fundamentally reckless in taking on the journey at all, but Ellie is still smart and capable in her own right, and Dina's main function is to highlight how Ellie's obsession overtakes her, which as discussed we don't really see in the show because of the inconsistent tone. The parent-child framing is also a really weird way to characterize a relationship between 2 adults who are romantically intertwined, let alone 2 sapphic women. Too often, women in fiction are really only allowed to fill one of 3 roles: child, mother, or whore. There's plenty of good writing where women as much as men are whole persons with their own motives and agency, of course, but it's easy to tell a hack writer, or a writer who becomes a hack when women are involved, by if and how they fall back on these archetypes. Whatever plaudits Craig Mazin may deserve for his writing of men, and to give credit where it's due, I'll again come back to how he handled Bill and Frank as an example of that. As soon as we move from a narrative primarily focused on men, not only Joel, but also Bill, Henry, Tommy, and David as characters who either serve as an example to live up to, or a cautionary tale, to one primarily focused on women in the form of Ellie and Abby, he flounders. With Ellie, it seems he cannot get past her being a child in season 1, and so he has to lean on this shifting parent-child dynamic between her and Dina. And the only reasonable conclusion he can come to is to have them rescued by a man. In the game, Ellie goes out to Hillcrest to rescue who she thinks is Tommy, but it turns out to be Jesse. Their paths fighting and fleeing the WLF intersect, And because he is wounded, she has to get him back to the theatre in order for Dina to take care of him before she goes out again in pursuit of Nora. Her journey in both regards is purposeful, and her actions are intentional and deliberate. In the show, Jesse has to save Ellie and Dina from certain death by stalkers, and immediately takes charge to lead them back to safety, dragging Ellie along in his wake. It's only because they run into the Seraphites and are separated that pure chance dumps Ellie at the hospital, and she uses the opportunity to take on Nora. For that brief moment, we see Game Ellie on the TV screen. But once she returns to the theatre, she is so overcome by guilt from finding out the full truth and from a literal second kill in Seattle that she is all but relating to Abby's motives. Season 2's problems with the handling of the women characters also highlights how Tessa's character suffered in Season 1. The problematic nature of her death was the culmination of that, of course. The completely unnecessary change from going out guns blazing to save Joel and Ellie from Fedra, to still saving them, but in a more passive way that lingers on the sexual assault that she suffers at the hands of an infected while she tries to spark the lighter in order to take them all out. It's made all the worse, as so many things on this show are, by Craig Mazin trying to explain why he thinks his writing is so clever.
There's this sense that, what we are may look disgusting, and the way we reproduce may be horrifying and violated. But it is tender. When this man comes to her, it's not violent because she's not fighting. If she ran, if she fought back, they would take her apart.
Yeah.
But she's just standing there, and he very gently shares of himself. And it's very Jungian. It's very upsetting. Anything penetrative is disgusting and scary when you're dealing with monsters. And it just, I don't know, there's something so creepy and gross and primal about it. And yet also weirdly, like Neil said, especially the way he shot it, beautiful. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that shot. And that's why we wanted to do it. That's so much more interesting than like Fedra showed up and shot her.
Well, Craig and Neil aren't wrong that there's a primal horror in this kind of penetrative act. But nor is this any kind of revelation. It's been done, arguably to death, in horror forever. And there's a particular tired trope of it being done to women over and over again. Films such as Alien subverted that by having the horror of penetration and impregnation inflicted primarily on men, and having a woman be the one who survives and avoids it. But there's nothing new or interesting in this scene, just a male writer and male director reducing a woman to the near helpless victim of a penetrative act, which they view as non-violent because she doesn't fight back, making it even worse in retrospect. And sure, she does this to save Joel and Ellie, but this is only more interesting than Tess going out guns blazing, taking out several Fedra soldiers in the process, if you're interested in the removal of strength and agency from a character who is normally defined by it. Though, reflecting on that brings us back to the fact that they also chose for Tess to not be as strong in the show as in the game, in general. We first meet Tess in the game when she wakes Joel up, having been jumped by two of Robert's men. She gets a shiner, but manages to kill them before they can kill her, and in response is immediately ready to get payback. As we travel to do so, it becomes clear through her interactions both with Joel and with other residents of the zone that she is widely known, with a fearsome reputation, and though Joel is as well, she is the one calling the shots. She is, in essence, a mob boss, with Joel as her enforcer. She has no hesitation in doing what she needs to get what she wants.
Fuck this. That is a stupid idea.
In the show, on the other hand, Robert manages to catch her and shows no fear of her, only of Joel. Through the episode, we see Joel, not Tess, making deals and driving their business. Tess escapes through happenstance due to a Firefly attack, which leaves her shaking, compared to the attack in the game, which merely forces her to change the routes she takes to get to Robert. And she waits overnight before telling Joel what has happened. Even then, she has to drip feed him information and plead to stop him going off after Robert, rather than being the driving force of him doing so. Part of this, of course, is due to a change in motivation. In the show, Joel is actively searching for a way to reach Tommy, which puts him, rather than Tess, in the driving seat of events that lead to his and Ellie's paths crossing. But the result of this is stripping Tess of so much of her drive and ferocity, and even of that moment of giving Robert his comeuppance, because it's Fedra who kills him. And even the decision to smuggle Ellie is given to Joel over Tess. Where in the game she is a force of nature, determined to get what is rightfully hers, and Joel is pulled along by the tide until he is saddled with the responsibility for this girl, until his care for her becomes too strong to deny or resist. Here, despite telling Robert that Joel answers to her, he is instead following a path determined by him. The end result being that the changed nature of her death becomes even worse because of so much else that has already been taken from her character and given to this different version of Joel. It can be argued that the changes to Tess here are unintentional, done in service for the most part of crafting a softer, more sympathetic version of Joel for the show. But even if we accept this and gloss over the lack of intent, it doesn't prevent the impact we've discussed. The question then becomes, what happened to Ellie? She is the main character of Season 2, and yet her characterization has been sacrificed in service of more superficial changes to the order of events, or to bolster supporting characters in ways that, as we've discussed, don't add any value to the narrative. Ellie in the game starts out bright and fiery, but traumatized by survivor's guilt. She puts on a tough facade to hide how scared she is in the first game, and in the second she funnels that fear into rage as she loses herself to a violence that she's learned from Joel but was never fully able to replicate. She looked up to him and tried to emulate him even when estranged from him, but where Joel's violence was cold and driven by necessity, Ellie's was driven by passion and single-mindedness. It made her a force to be reckoned with, but also reckless, which in turn was both how she survived and how situations were turned against her in an instant. Such as when she allows Nora to bait her for an escape, or when she loses control of Mel and Owen. And this cocktail of survivor's guilt and passionate violence not only drove her to Seattle, but was the reason that she came so close to completely losing herself. We never meet that Ellie in the show, but even the version we do meet is only a shade that Craig can't fully commit to. Even the reconciliation with Seth, which we touched on earlier, renders him more apologetic and deferential than any version of Ellie that we know. Her being activated by violence means nothing at the point when violence is supposed to be claiming her soul. Her single-mindedness fails her when it should be at its strongest, so that Dina has to urge her on. Her trauma never even threatens to rear its head when she accepts cookies from Dina, Game Ellie famously refusing food at every opportunity throughout Part 2 as a reflection of her mindset, or when she reacts happily to a pregnancy whose only known impact at that point will be to hamstring her quest for revenge. On the subject of Dina, it's also worth noting how much more male-centered her character is in the show. We've already discussed how the decision to delay the journey to Seattle affected the progression of Ellie and Dina's relationship. During the Jackson segment of the game, her characterization is rooted in how strong her feelings are for Ellie, constantly flirting and dropping hints, as well as making it clear that she is going on this journey for Ellie.
You go, I go. End of story.
In the show, instead Dina spends her time bonding with Joel so that she has a motive to go on the quest independent of Ellie, and talking about how much she cares for Jesse and constantly centering him even after she and Ellie have kissed. Yes, she still gets with Ellie, and her hesitancy is given an in-universe reason with her mother's rejection of her sexuality. But these changes still fit into a broader pattern in the show of the characters centering men and men's feelings more than they did in the game. Even the on-point hair and skincare feel very much like the show prioritized the male gaze over the more realistic and practical look of the games. Because that long hair would absolutely be gripped and ragged by the first runner they encounter, or get snagged on barbs when they're squeezing through tight spaces, and makeup would take up vital space in their packs that they need for more important resources. But for some reason, we're pandering to the kind of dickhead who would make those cringe-inducing AI hire fans memes. And for what? They'll still call it woke anyway, because that's the grift. Then there's Abby. I've talked in a previous video about the role her physique plays in her story. It's a visual representation of her single-minded focus on killing Joel, and makes her emaciation in Santa Barbara all the more visceral and shocking. And more than just being a way to make Ellie and Abby feel different in gameplay, it's part of what makes her so terrifying as a foe for Ellie, and helps highlight the parallels between her and Joel, despite him being the focus of all her rage and hate. As I said in that video, as important as her physique is, you can still tell her story without it, as long as you treat it with proper care. But not only have we now seen Season 2, we also know that Season 3 will not have Neil Druckmann and Hallie Gross involved. Craig will be writing this all by himself. So what does that mean for Abby? Well, Craig thought it unrealistic for Ellie to punch Owen once, because he's taller than her. This despite her having a gun and being able to hold her own in a fight. Something he even went to the trouble of showcasing himself in episode 1. How much more unrealistic, in his eyes, will it be for Abby to do basically anything she does in the game? Like the battle with the Rat King, a crucial character moment not only because it's the culmination of her literal and metaphorical descent on the road to redemption, but also because that monster in the hospital is what she had expected Joel to be, the fight she built herself up to for years, only for revenge to be anticlimactic. And the monster that splits off from it, using stealth and aggression to try and avenge its parent, is a foreshadowing of a theatre battle with Ellie. But will Craig think that realistic, or will there need to be a man involved in the fight as well? Perhaps I'm being unfair, but so far every female character has lost a degree of their strength in the translation from game to screen. And not just the obvious one, who this time around won't be built like an ox. Abby has already had to call her father's killer handsome for some reason. And because Craig couldn't not have her do what she did to Joel, he's tried to soften the blow at every opportunity, with her monologue and constant reminders of why she did it that even Ellie sympathizes with. Say, did you know that Joel shot Abby's dad in the head? Because although male characters can do horrific things and still become sympathetic after the fact, with a woman that's far less likely. And rather than just ignore the kind of person who will never take a liking to her no matter what anyway, we're still trying to pander to them for some reason. I haven't even touched on what might happen to Lev's characterization, especially since we're having a trans boy being played by a cis woman. But I'll deal with that kind of worms once we see what we actually get in Season 3. As I mentioned at the start of this video, I've been putting off talking about this for a long time. Again, I'd much rather talk about things that I enjoy than things I don't. But my dislike of the show doesn't stem from them not trying to replicate the games one-to-one. I know that's not how adaptation across mediums works. But what you can and should be aiming to replicate is the soul of the thing, who the characters are, and the fundamentals of the story. Craig Mazin has somehow managed to do that with Season 1, and then not only fail in Season 2, but do so in a way that sours what he did in Season 1 and bring the flaws of that season into much starker relief. If you have a different take, whether you liked the things that I've critiqued, or you were critical of different aspects than me, I'd be interested to hear it in the comments. All that I ask is that we keep any discussion civil and in good faith, rather than contributing to the noise pollution that just makes it harder to talk about these things sensibly. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. Like the video that's just popped up. which YouTube thinks you should watch next. This is a Patreon and member supported channel, so if you want to become a member and unlock custom badges and emojis, early access to my videos, and your name in the credits, then click the join button below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. The entire bottle is empty, and I really hope I didn't slur my speech through that, and it was still mostly coherent, but we'll find out, I guess.